Do you remember your first ride? You know, the first mode of transportation that gave you a newfound freedom when you were younger. Stick with me for a few minutes while I go back in time and explore some great memories. Hello, I'm your host, Gary Neidert, and you're listening to My First Ride podcast. Today we're going to go back in time to celebrate when the 500,000th Chevy Corvette rolled off the production line. Say that real, 500,000th? Say that fast 3 times. In my research, I discovered some great Corvette trivia, and I know you're going to enjoy this story. So let's just get right into it. And this information comes from 3 different resources today. On this day, 365daysofmotoring.com, Wikipedia, and also corvsport.com. And so there was some great information on all these. So let's start off with 365 Days of Motoring. Tuesday, March 15th, 1977, 43 years ago, the 500,000th Chevrolet Corvette was produced. Again, say that 3 times fast. It was a white coupe with red interior to match the first 1953 Corvette. 22-year-old Francis Patrick Murat, I believe that's how his name is said. If I said your name wrong, please excuse me. Of Detroit, Michigan, purchased the car. And unlike other milestone Corvettes, it's privately owned. And at the time of this article, I think it was in the Corvette Museum in Bowling Green, Kentucky. At least if it didn't go down in the sinkhole that happened a few years ago. So let's take a look at some information that was listed on Wikipedia. A little bit of a background of the Corvette and a little bit of history and so forth. So the Chevrolet Corvette was also known as the Vette. It's a 2-door, 2-passenger sports car manufactured and marketed by Chevrolet across more than 60 years of production and 8 design generations. From 1953 to 2019, it was front-engined. But in 2020, it was redesigned and introduced as a mid-engine car, with its generations noted sequentially from C1 to C8. The Corvette serves as Chevrolet's halo vehicle and is widely noted for its performance and distinctive plastic, either fiberglass or composite bodywork. So in 1953, when GM executives were looking to name the new Chevrolet sports car, the Assistant Director for Public Relations Department, Myron Scott, suggested Corvette after the small maneuverable warship, and the name was approved. I mean, think about it. We're 10 years, less than 10 years after the end of World War II, so that's kind of on people's minds. The first model, which was a convertible, was introduced at the GM Motorama in 1953 as a concept, and it was followed 10 years later by the 1963 second generation, which was either in a coupe or a convertible. Originally manufactured in Flint, Michigan and St. Louis, Missouri, the Corvette's been manufactured in Bowling Green, Kentucky since 1981. The Corvette has since become widely known as America's sports car, which it truly is. I mean, it set the tone. I mean, the T-Bird was introduced in the mid-50s, And but it tended to be more towards the luxuries slash sports car, but it really turned into more of a luxury car. The Corvette went more the line of a sports car. But again, it's widely known as America's sports car. Now, Automotive News wrote that after starring in the early 1960s television show Route 66, how many of you remember that? Do you remember that? I remember it was black and white and in black and white instead of color, a long time before color. But I remember the TV show. But because of the show, the Corvette became synonymous with freedom and adventure. And it ultimately became both the most successful concept car in history and the most popular sports car in history. So the first generation was the C1, 53 to 62. Second generation, C2, 63 through 67. The C3, 68 through 82, which the 1977 Corvette falls into the C3 category. The fourth generation was 84 to 1996. The fifth generation was 1997 to 2004. Sixth generation, 2005 to 2013. Seventh generation, 2014 to 2019. And of course, the eighth generation, which was the 2020 mid-engine Corvette to now. So let's take a little bit more look at some information. And this is from CorvetteSport.com. So the C3 Corvette, two-door coupe. Now here's some of the colors. Classic white, silver, black, Corvette light blue, Corvette dark blue, Corvette chartreuse. I never saw that one. Corvette yellow, Corvette bright yellow, Corvette orange, Corvette tan, medium red, and Corvette dark red. Now, I had some friends. Actually, it was a roommate. He had the dark blue. I knew a girl in where I grew up. She had the Corvette tan. And then there was a couple of other people that I knew. I think theirs were earlier Corvettes. One was a kind of a chocolate brown. That's not the official color of it, but that's what color it was. And excuse me while I try to set this, or it won't fly up again. Maybe it will. And another lady, hers was a white one with the red interior. So the engine, oh man, get this. Now, here we are. We're in the middle of the 70s. That's when they started choking down the cars, the horsepower, because of small control and all that kind of thing. They didn't have the sophisticated ways of doing it like what they do now, of making the engines cleaner running and producing more horsepower. So there were two options. It was a 350 cubic inch engine with 2 horsepower options. There was the 180 horsepower, the standard, and then there was a 210 horsepower engine as an option. And when I did the video and the podcast on the Pontiac Trans Am, the 6-cylinder that the first came out with on the Firebirds, the option was an inline 6 with a 4-barrel carburetor, produced 215 horsepower. So anyway, but here we are. We're at a point where you can get from the factory 750 horsepower in a Mustang GT500. You can get the Hellcat over 700 horsepower. So we've come around. But now there's talk that the Hellcat and some of those are going to go away. So I don't know if that's going to happen, but let's go on. So the transmission, there was a 4-speed manual that was standard, 4-speed manual close ratio, or the 3-speed turbo hydromatic, which was an option. There were 49,213 of the 77 Corvettes produced. For Chevrolet, however, the 1977 model year marked a significant manufacturing milestone: the production of their 500,000th Corvette. Now, it had taken Chevrolet 15 years to build the first 250,000 Corvettes. 15 years. Now, think this. It's been going on for 15 years. They got 250,000 Corvettes they've manufactured. But in the next 8 years, they produced another 250,000. So that it really ramped up. That became a lot more popular, and they sold a ton more of them. So let's see. While the 250,000th Corvette had been a Riverside Gold convertible that was built on November 7th of 1969, the 500,000th Corvette was a white coupe, like I said before, which was driven off the production line at 2:01 p.m. by the Chevrolet general manager at that time, Robert Lund, on March 15th of 1997. What a historical day. Pretty cool. Outwardly, the 77 C3 Corvette was virtually identical to the 76 model, except for the introduction of a reworked luggage and roof panel rack that could be used to transport the car's T-tops instead of placing them behind the Corvette's lidless trunk. Well, if you want to call it a trunk, it was just a storage compartment behind the two seats. Now, glass T-tops were introduced as a new option at the start of the 77 model year. However, GM later canceled the option because of a reputed dispute with a supplier over the sales rights. So would this be considered the controversy for the 77 Corvette? Anyway, the most notable change from 1976 to 77, however, was the removal of the Stingray nameplate from the Corvette's front fender. So it was known for many, many years as the Corvette Stingray. And I remember when I was a kid, I had a model, the Mako Shark. It was a concept car, which they later based the C2 Corvettes off of. And anyway, so they dropped the Stingray. I don't know why they did that, but they did. That little insignia, Stingray, was replaced by Corvette's traditional crossed flag insignia. Now, the interior of the 77 Corvette featured a redesigned center console, an improved dashboard, and leather seats as a standard option. However, cloth seats with leather bolsters were an option at no cost. So, which would you rather have? The cloth seats with leather bolsters or leather seats? The changes to the interior were equally subtle, though there were a few more modifications worth noting. First, the interior center radio console was redesigned to accept a broader array of Delco audio decks. I get this. Including an AM/FM cassette stereo as a first-time option. Who remembers 8 tracks? And who remembers cassettes? Well, so now we know that they were trying to do away with the 8-track in the 77 Corvettes. The steering column was shortened by a couple of inches to allow for more of an arms-out driving position. And the shorter steering column improved driver accessibility getting in and out of the new Corvette. Mated to the steering column was a new leather-rimmed steering wheel. And I remember a friend of mine, his blue his blue 77 Corvette. Beautiful car, and that the steering wheel was thicker with that leather trim on it. Really, really nice. Also, like the 76 model, the new Corvette could be ordered with an optional 210 horsepower engine, or the Pro L48, except in Canada, where the base engine remained the only available option due to higher emission standards. Well, the emission standards just killed all the performance in the 70s. While the engines remained the same, there was an interesting turn of events within General Motors that occurred early in the 77 model year production. Between August 23rd and September 7 of 1976, Flint Engine, the plant where the small block 350 was manufactured, began using blue paint in place of the traditional Chevy orange paint that had normally been applied to Corvette engines. Have you ever noticed that? If you've ever owned a Corvette, a 77, did you notice that? Interesting. That was that little bit of trivia that I never knew about. So thus, early 77 model year Corvettes continued to feature the familiar orange, while later production engines were blue. The 77 Corvette set another new sales record at 49,213 units. The popularity of the Chevy Corvette throughout the 70s was proven time and time again, and year-over-year increased sales in numbers continued despite the dramatic increase in cost and some of the economic downturns. It still remained a popular vehicle. In 1974, the base sticker price of the Corvette had crossed the $6,000 barrier for the first time. Well, actually, it was $6,001.50. With each year, the price increase had been notable due to the inclusion of so many standard comfort and convenience features. So $6,810 in 1975, $7,604 in 1976, and $8,647 in 1977. Now, at that time, 77, 78, 79, in 78, I bought a black crew cab dually pickup. And while I was buying the pickup, I was thinking, I could go buy a Corvette for what I'm paying for this truck. But the Corvette couldn't haul the stuff I needed to haul with the crew cab dually. Anyway, despite this, there was no question that the popularity of the Corvette was still on the rise, which was doubly amazing, though not surprising, given that the C3 Corvette was a decade old. So there you have it. The 500,000th Chevrolet Corvette, manufactured on March 15th of 1977, 43 years ago. So I hope you enjoyed this little bit of Corvette information. I did. Brought back some memories. I remembered 4 different people I knew from back in the mid-70s that had Corvettes. A roommate, a girl I knew in where I grew up, and a couple of other people. And so it was kind of fun revisiting those memories. And that's what this is all about, My First Ride podcast. Go back and revisit memories of cars that we had, our first car, and just some of those memories that it brought back. So I remember driving the tan Corvette. Her name was Kathy. I don't remember her last name. I was really disappointed in how little horsepower that car had. It just didn't run that fast, but that's another story. Anyway, well, I hope you enjoyed this. So what's coming up? I'm constantly searching for people that would enjoy telling their stories of their first rides and how their lives were influenced by them. You know, the story behind the story. And I bet you probably know someone that would be a great guest for My First Ride podcast, right? Maybe that someone's you. Let me know a little bit about them and their story. Same thing goes for you. What about telling your story? Let me know your story. Check us out and subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, Spotify, coming soon on iHeartRadio, and much more. And of course, you can always go to the website at myfirstridepodcast.com. One final thought. You may not have your first ride, but you still have the memories. It's time to share them. Contact me if you have any question regarding today's podcast, or you'd like to be a guest on My First Ride podcast. I'm Gary Neidert, and you've just experienced My First Ride podcast. Call me 972-771-7899. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching.